and it's none other than Mikiko Bisley. Mikiko is an MLOps engineer consulting and creating educational content for practitioners and entrepreneurs looking to build full stack ML applications. He has spent the last 7+ years as a growth hacker, data analyst, data scientist, and MLOps engineer, working for companies like MailChimp, Teladoc, Autodesk, and Sunrun. Today, she'll be talking about what you need to know to pivot to MLOps. It's a very important topic. I'm kind of super excited. I was just telling her in the green room as well that I'm kind of, wanting to learn more about MLOps. What's it about? So without any further ado, let's have Mikiko here. It's such a pleasure to have you here, Mikiko. We're super excited to have you. Very cool background. I was just having a look at your slides as well. So looking forward to your talk, but stage is all yours. Yeah.
All right, Mikiko, awesome. We'll let you take it away. We'll hop off the stage, and I see your screen, so we'll go ahead and get that shared as well. We'll see you in about 10, 12 minutes, and folks, keep those questions coming. We'll try to take as many as we can after her talk.
Awesome, great. And just confirming y'all can hear me, right? Because that has been
Yes, we can hear you and see you, and your screen, everything is great.
Awesome, cool. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Mikiko. I'm a senior MLOps engineer. I was previously at MailChimp. I've moved on to a new exciting thing that hopefully I can announce soon. Might be previewed by some swag. So initially I kind of wanted to say, I want to call this talk everything you need to know to do well in MLOps, well enough, because the reality, it's a really moving field. So yeah, just quick highlights about myself. Studied anthropology and econ at UCSD. I have done all the roles, worked in a lot of industries, worked in a lot of companies, most recently MailChimp Intuit, but I've also worked at Autodesk, Teladoc, Sunrun. And I'm also self-taught / informally taught. I've worn many hats in the data science ML shoes. So a lot of the experiences and kind of my manifesto, I guess, for this presentation is stuff that I ran into, trying to make it work as a practitioner that maybe didn't come from a very traditional background. Okay, so let's reset. What is MLOps again? MLOps, it's the discipline that is dedicated to operationalizing machine learning. That is what it is in a nutshell. With that being said, sometimes it can look like this. And my God, is this messy for anyone who's ever worked with machine learning in production. So I'm going to lay down some 5 rules or principles I think will serve not just people who want to pivot to MLOps well, but also to teams and organizations that are trying to think about how to implement it. So these are my thoughts and experiences. I'll try to back it up with some data, some interesting stories, but to a certain extent, these are just kind of what I've experienced. Everyone is going to experience something differently, and that is encompassed by my first sort of principle, which is there is no one stack to rule them all, and there might not ever be a single stack. And more importantly, the stack that's right for you might not be right for others, and vice versa. So, okay, unlike the data world with the modern data stack principle, in general, so there's this idea that, okay, there's going to be some kind of consolidation in ML tooling and all that stuff. And the way I look at it is every single time a new tool has awoken, we've not necessarily decreased the size of the pie, we've just increased it, right? Essentially, we've just created another universal adapter. And look, there's nothing wrong with that, because essentially the way we can think about it is that every innovation that comes out, every new paradigm, every new abstraction, it releases future engineers, data science, machine learning engineers from the burden of for example, having to hard code Hadoop or Spark. If people remember in the 2010 era, I had a friend who had joined Apple's machine learning team. And what she had said to me was, hey, you need to learn Spark. That is going to be the wave of the future, right? And the reality is that since then, we've had a lot of additional abstractions, and more importantly, a lot of the tools that we see as being very popular in the enterprise MLOps tool chain were only released in the last realistically 5 to 8 years. So, the way I look at it is, not only that, but also our thought process about MLOps. Like, what are the problems that people have run into in production ML? A lot of it has been led by companies like Google with papers like machine learning, the high interest credit card debt, with that very famous diagram that I decided not to add into this presentation. There's been a lot of like amazing thoughts, and also a lot of advances in deep learning, in computer vision pipelines, which provide additional sort of challenges in terms of productionizing machine learning, right? So this is the ecosystem right now. And a lot of times I have to say to people that, look, there's a lot of tools out there. And depending on how big you draw the size of the circle, there are a lot of tools. So any consolidation wave that is going to happen, if you're depending on the VCs to dictate that the size of the circle that results, good luck with that. There's still going to be a lot of tools. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. There really isn't. Because you know what? Boring stacks are where it's at, but new tools might mitigate old problems, right? So if you have the chance, I'll post up the slides later. This is an amazing thread, but it's Kubernetes as thought of by Seinfeld. And specifically this idea that, look, not everyone's going to operate at Google or Amazon scale. Some companies, like companies I've worked at or consulted with, are closer to the small, medium-sized era, right? So there's this concept that's been floating around in the MLOps world called reasonable scale MLOps, or what I like to call MLOps for the rest of us. And there's this idea that, a lot of the thought and leadership and direction on stacks has been led by Google and Amazon. But the reality is that there are people in businesses that are much smaller in maturity, in revenue, in team size, and they need a completely different stack. Now, most of that theme of stacks is going to be mostly serverless and OpenStack. But you know what? The beautiful part is that there has been enough work done in production ML to where if you are an SMB, if you're a startup, if you're early stage, if you're limited on resources, guess what? There are tools that, given the paradigm of what you're trying to go for, you can plug and play, right? My third manifesto my third principle is the stack should address two outcomes. One, serving innovative value-producing models consistently and at scale. That is number one. But guess what? Employee retention is number two. If it does neither, it's useless. If it only does one, it's incomplete. Why do I say that? And I say this because honestly, like I've had a number of experiences working on tooling our platforms, right? And we can think of platform teams as they develop tools or building blocks that eventually form the tool chain of other engineering teams or other data science teams. In terms of like how they're different from, let's say, a product focused team, they're really focused on technical mission. They are serving the internal key stakeholders. And I firmly believe data scientists are those internal key stakeholders for ML platforms. So Camille Fournier, she wrote an article called The Product Culture Shift. She's also famous for The Manager's Path. And what she's saying is that, look, if you have, senior talent that doesn't have the empathy and perspective to be able to work with data scientists or ML engineers, they're essentially going to build tools that frankly aren't at all useful. And the reality is that in mature companies or in companies that are high performing, that operate at scale, whether it's Google, whether it is Autodesk, MailChimp, whatever, they do have internal platform teams, right? And these internal platform teams, they do a lot. And the reality is that for a lot of MLOps initiatives, they're either going to be, carried by like a couple teams, or they're going to be carried by a single team. And this is important because the reality is that everyone is trying to move to ML maturity scale, right? There are different stages of it, but everyone wants to implement some kind of, data intensive pipelines or ML or models or ML into their products. Fourth, the hardest problem to solve in MLOps adoption isn't tools, it's ego. So this is what Swedes think of data scientists. And as someone who is a data scientist and also moved over to the engineering side, I felt personally attacked by this meme. And the idea is that Swedes just don't think of data science as being very valuable. They just think of data scientists as like producing charts and analyses that basically don't go anywhere, right? Of course, the problem with this is also sometimes an engineer ego, where we think, okay, well, because we're so good at anything code, we can kind of extrapolate that to any kind of situation. And any kind of interface we build should be good enough. People should come up to our level. But of course, no one loves the TEDx engineer full stack data scientist unicorn. The reality is that data scientists come from a wide variety of backgrounds. This was analysis done by Indeed on where do data scientists come from. Not only do data scientists come from a pretty varied educational background, maybe not as much as data engineers and data analysts, but more importantly, the degree and the field of study is quite different for data scientists versus SWEs. The reality is that software engineers tend to have the least diverse educational backgrounds, whereas data scientists have the most diverse fields of study. So the reality is that our key stakeholders, our internal partners that we are serving as MLOps engineers, they come from a wide variety of backgrounds, of skill sets, and more importantly, their main goal is not incentivized to always produce like what some people would say software engineer level code. There are challenges with that assumption because the reality is that I've met plenty of really great data scientists who can do great code, right? But the other part too is that sometimes I hear people say like, look, it's a tooling problem. And I really want to say it's really not. Going back to that chart, for example, if you walk into Safeway and you look at the jam aisle, you wouldn't say like, oh, there aren't enough jams in the world. And certainly I would say that for tools in the ecosystem. Really, I think where we want to get to is essentially having the right abstractions. Okay, so my fifth one, and I'm running up, I'm going to try to close this out, is for everyone who is trying to hire the unicorn MLOps engineer or who wants to be the MLOps engineer, the candidates look a lot less like, high-powered sports cars and look a lot more like Range Rovers. Because guess what? It is a challenging terrain out there. So a way I like to think about it is wicked versus kind environments. This is talked about in Range, but it was also based off of research done by, I'm blanking on the name, right? Kind environments, they're consistent, highly constrained, limited variables, limited choice for variables, clearly defined success criteria, high level information availability, tight and understandable feedback loops. Glinda says, yes, she loves it. But the reality is that this is actually what an MLOps engineer, MLOps team is going to be facing, not just at the enterprise level, but sometimes at startups where you have more variables to consider. A lot of times the information is not out there. There is this thing called tribal knowledge. Sometimes the goals are less understandable because ideally, for a lot of businesses, you want to be focused on, once again, the two outcomes. You want to make people happy about the tools that they're using, but you also want the tools to actually be providing business value, and you want them to be serving models consistently and in such a way that data scientists and ML engineers can iterate on it. The Wicked Witch of the West says, cool. But the reality is that in an environment where the ecosystem is constantly changing, where systems are incredibly complex, where a lot of times the business criteria is uncertain, and even when data scientists, for example, are oftentimes interfacing with a lot more teams than an MLOps team or an MLOps platform team, business, product, legal, finance, you name it. The reality is that we need candidates. We need to hire people, not titles. We need people who can span multiple different disciplines, who have multiple different skill sets. And we also need to be able to combine them into not just like a team of all 10x engineers, or what my uncle likes to say, he doesn't want to hire like the A team members. He wants to build an A team. And the reality is that a lot of times when you're building stuff, you find bugs, you think you squash them, and then you create new problems. Once upon a time, we didn't have Docker. We didn't have containers. And we said, hey, it's going to solve the problem of it doesn't work on my machine. And then we had to solve the problem of, great, now we have to orchestrate these different containers. And that's how you get Kubernetes. So to summarize my MLOps manifesto, the first one is no Han Solo stack. Number 2, class it stack, but make it your way. 3, make it work delightfully. 4, PEBCAC. And 5, think 4-wheel drive. If you have additional questions for me about Mlops, find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Substack. It was a long link. I didn't add it. Yeah. And that is my spiel.
Ravi, you're on mute, so I'm going to take the first few comments. That's the second one. I'm keeping a tally. I have a whiteboard. I should put it on there. Mikiko, thank you so much for this awesome presentation. We do have a flood of comments that came in. A lot of the comments are asking for the slides. People love the slides. People want the slides. They're like, we need the slides. So maybe you can post the slides and people can follow you and, you know, take it from there. That's so I love how pumped people are about the presentations. First of all, I'm in the mood for jam now. I was gonna go grab some jam, but I knew I wouldn't have time. But second, there were a lot of logos on that one page that you sort of crammed together, all the tools, and that's insanity, I think. And I don't think we're ending there, right? The number of tools is just gonna keep growing as people keep trying to solve little nuanced problems. Yeah, absolutely. And I think and this gets talked about a lot because, and that's the most common question I get, right? Both as like, as a content creator, as a developer, as an engineer, you name it, which is, how do I build a stack? It's like, yes, I have so many options, but where do I go? And that's very similar, right? To the paralysis analysis or analysis paralysis jam experiment, right? Where if you give people 2 jams, like, look, they'll pick one and they'll be very happy about it. You give people like 20, 30 jams, they're like losing their minds. What's going on? And so I didn't dive into this in the second part about how, yes, you should have like classic tools that work. But at the same time, we do have new tools. We do have new libraries. The MLOps like open source ecosystem is constantly evolving. Some of these have evolved to solve these issues. So for example, once upon a time, you had to host your own like Kubernetes cluster. Once upon a time, you had to host your own Airflow server, right? Or and the thing is, or Airflow instance, but now we have, for example, for Airflow, I think there's Astronomer, there's Prefect, there's a number of orchestration options out there. And then same with Kubernetes. Now we have managed versions of Kubernetes. There is the big ones, GKE, there's AWS, Azure, they all have their own versions of it. But there's also some open source software, open source tools out there where if you're a startup or you're like a solo practitioner or you're a consultant or what have you, if you want to just like, for example, implement a proof of concept for a client, you can use those instead. You don't have to go and set up your own Kubernetes cluster, right? And I think that is like the theme is mostly serverless and OpenStack is going to be like the big trend. So, and that's the other thing of why I think it's about the right abstractions and where that active listening and empathy comes in. Because what I've heard a lot of times from software engineers is like, look, why can't data scientists just get it? Why can't they just do it? I just created this really cool command line interface. Why are they not just getting on board with it? And it's not really, this is a common problem that internal like platform teams have faced for years. It's not new. It's just we're having this intersection of like hard stuff with data science, machine learning, and also that has like additional complications on the tool chain that traditional code doesn't. We have a lot more democratization of educational resources and being able to get into these new fields. And we have a lot of companies that want to drive value. So I think it's amazing. I don't see a time when we won't have this conflict, but I think maybe people could help themselves and their adoption of good like production ML practices if sometimes they didn't have their head up their butt. So yes, that is the ending. And I absolutely love your passion here. Ravi, do you want to ask a couple questions from the audience? Yep, go ahead.
One very interesting question here from Dustin is, what should an organization that is in an earlier stage of analytics maturity be thinking about to get started with MLOps? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to like, what is your current, it goes back to what's your current pain point. I think for a lot of companies and teams, and this is actually something that I was thinking about a lot, especially reading through Joe and Matt's book and their podcasts on like managing the ML and data lifecycle in the same org and team. Really, okay, so the first question that I think like if an org that is analytics mature, but maybe they're not so mature on the data science machine learning parts, is first they should think about like how are they going to actually serve the models and the predictions. Like, so for example, any models they serve, is it, for example, like lead scoring? Does it go back into a Salesforce CRM? Or is it going to be customer facing where, let's say, for example, they want to do a clothing recommender? Like they want to help style someone's outfit. Those, the serving patterns for those models or those pipelines are going to look very different. Because if you want to serve model predictions for example, for a sales team in an internal Salesforce instance, you can essentially do those calculations, for example, even in something like a Jupyter notebook, like AI platform, or what they call Vertex AI now, SageMaker, you name it. And then you set up some kind of reverse ETL pipeline and then just push it back into Salesforce, right? And that's a very simple way to go. But if someone is, for example, wanting to serve customers, even there are still like very common patterns that they can use, but that would be the very first thing to think about. And then I think the next thing to think about realistically is what kind of team size and resources they have to like support and maintain any kind of like tool chain and tool stack. And the bit about like how the problem in MLOps is like not tools, it's ego. That actually came out because I was talking with a developer advocate over at NVIDIA. I forgot what product line of NVIDIA they work on, but I was asking him like, what's the biggest issue that you have in terms of like working with your like business partners or your clients? And he said that, look, the challenge is that sometimes, number one, they don't want to ask for help. And then number two, when they're trying to navigate the build buy process, they don't want to admit that sometimes they would be better off just buying the tool. Or not even buying it, but bringing in like from the open source ecosystem. Because for a lot of engineers, they think, oh, I can go ahead and build this. I can go ahead and whatever. It's like, yeah, a lot of engineers can build stuff, but they can't really they don't always want to maintain it. And this was something that we ran into at one of my more recent companies. Was we had a CLI tool that we used to like template data science projects to make it easier for them to go into production. It set it up with all the configuration files, whether they wanted to do a batch job using like BigQuery and BQML, or whether they wanted to do an API endpoint. And it was a hot mess. We had on-call situations all the time. People were made absolutely miserable by the tool. It took about at least a couple days to get a project set up. And we constantly ran into bugs. And then, the M1 laptop came out. Docker support was terrible for a little bit. And then everything broke because we were doing local development, like with containers. So, in that situation, right? Like, oh God, sorry, I'm thinking about how much of a mess it was. Yeah. So
you're having flashbacks. You're like, oh no.
I really am. But in that situation, right? Like some people would argue that, look, it makes sense maybe just to do like pure cloud remote development. Mm-hmm. Maybe use a tool like I don't know, like DeepNote or some like other similar tools, right? And instead just have a notebook that you can essentially deploy. You have an API endpoint behind it. You have some tests, make sure it all works, and just keep it like really simple. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times there's this FOMO where companies think, oh, we need to make it more complex. There needs to be more boxes. The diagram needs to have more boxes, or it's not a legitimate engineering diagram. But I think that goes back to probably the theme that everyone's going to hit on, which is business value, right? If you're not delivering extra ROI, if people are being made miserable by the complexity, then is that really a stack that deserves to stay?
I think those are experiences which are, truly coming out of you, Mikiko. So thanks for sharing those amazing experiences. And obviously, I think we have like tons of questions. I think, obviously we can't take all of them, but this was super interesting. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for giving us those insights about MLOps. You out there.
Yeah. One very quick thing, Mikiko, just let folks know where to find the slides before we let you go.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. Okay, I'll post them on LinkedIn. I'll also post them on Twitter, and I will post them everywhere.
Okay.